my first prerequisites, you know.
Marvin Gaye, the Prince of Soul, was one of the greatest musicians of all time, with timeless hits like Sexual Healing and Let's Get It On. His impact on music was immense, and his fans cherished him deeply. Many would have given their lives for his. Tragically, Gaye's career was cut short by his unexpected death, which shocked the world. His passing remains one of the most mysterious and controversial events in music history, with many unanswered questions. Stevie Wonder, a close friend and fellow music icon, has finally revealed details about the circumstances surrounding Marvin's demise. What shocking truth did Stevie uncover? Stay with us to learn the real story behind the tragic loss of Marvin Gaye. Birth and early childhood. Like many famous musicians, Marvin Gaye was born into a life of hardship and poverty. Born as Marvin Pence Gaye Jr. on April 2, 1939 in Washington, D.C., to father Marvin Gaye Sr. and mother Alberta Cooper, Marvin was the second of 4 children. His father, Marvin Sr., was a pastor who led a storefront church congregation whose tiny congregation could not support their large family. Following this, he worked sporadically part-time as a postal clerk and for Western Union in Washington. But because he could not hold on to a job, the family had to live in subsidized housing and survive on his mother's income as a maid. To worsen things, his father was allegedly a monster. His abusive and violent ways marked the entire time of Marvin's childhood as a traumatic experience. At first, he used the gospel of their church, the House of God, to press many prohibitions on his family. He forbade athletics, dancing, movies, television, and popular music. His daughters were not allowed to wear sleeveless dresses, nylons, lipstick, nail polish, or open-toed shoes. He also forced his children to observe an extended Sabbath, from Friday afternoon until midday Sunday. During that time, he questioned them on biblical passages, and if they failed to answer, he would assault them. For this reason, Marvin and his siblings were bedwetters, and that too prompted him to be violent towards them. According to Marvin, living with his father was like living with a dangerous, volatile, cruel, and all-powerful king. He told his biographer, Ritz, that he not only tiptoed around his father's moods, he tried to do anything to win his favor, and he sadly never won it. In fact, he bore the brunt of his father's abuse more than anyone else, even though everything he did during his childhood was to win his father's love. At the slightest provocation, like returning 15 minutes late from school or using his father's hairbrush, could earn him a serious act of violence from his father. His mother, Alberta, confirmed this, stating that her husband never wanted Marvin as his son, nor did he like him. He even went as far as claiming Marvin wasn't his son, even though he knew it was impossible. His hatred towards Marvin was unexplainable, and Alberta confessed that he also wanted her not to love Marvin. Even Marvin's sister, Jean Gaye, confessed that from the time Marvin turned 7 until he became a teenager, his childhood consisted of a series of brutal whippings. For these reasons, Marvin didn't particularly like his father or his life. He revealed to his biographer that if it wasn't for his mother, who was always there to console him and encourage his singing, he would have ended his life while he was still a child. He also began to take solace from his troubled home by playing the piano in the family's living room. He proved to be a natural musician because even though he never learned to read music, he could play any tune by ear, including the blues and popular ballads, when his father was not around. He progressed from playing the piano to singing in church. He developed a love of singing at an early age, and at his school, Randall Junior High School, he took singing much more seriously and joined the Randall Junior High Glee Club. It didn't take long before he became a singing star, but sadly it was short-lived. He left Randall Junior High for Spingarn High School and then transferred to Cardozo High School. There he tried his hand at vocal groups as opposed to clubs. He joined the Dippers and then the DC Tones, but again, he couldn't stay because this time 17-year-old Marvin dropped out of high school and enlisted in the United States Air Force as an airman basic. Sadly, he also didn't particularly like the Army as it was different from what he expected. Instead of working on jet airplanes as hoped, he was met with the harsh reality of performing menial work. To leave, he had to feign a mental illness, then he was given a general discharge. It's a good thing that Marvin's deception worked because it was the start of one of the greatest musical careers of all time. Humble career beginnings. That was when things changed and he decided to take music more seriously. He formed a vocal quartet, the Marquis, with his friend Reese Palmer. The group performed in the DC area and soon began working with Bo Diddley, who was trying to persuade his label, Chess, to sign them to a record deal. Sadly, that didn't work out, so he sent them to a Columbia subsidiary, OK Records. There, the group released their first single, Wyatt Earp. In another unfortunate twist, their single didn't chart, and the group was dropped from the label shortly after. It was at this time that Moonglow co-founder Harvey Fuqua hired the Marquis as employees. Under his direction, the group changed its name to Harvey and the New Moonglows and moved to Chicago. The group went on to record many sides for the Chess label in 1959, including the song Mama Lucy, which was Marvin's first lead vocal recording. The group also worked as session singers for other established musicians like Chuck Berry. However, just 1 year later in 1960, the group disbanded. Marvin moved to Detroit with Harvey, where he signed with Tree-Fi Records as a session musician, playing drums on several of the label's releases. Luckily, Marvin didn't remain behind the scenes for long. He was able to perform at Motown president Berry Gordy's house during the holiday season in December 1960. Impressed, Berry sought Harvey on his contract with Marvin. Harvey agreed to sell part of his interest in his contract with Marvin. Shortly afterward, Marvin signed with Motown subsidiary Tamla. After the signing, Marvin rebranded himself completely. Firstly, he changed his surname from Gaye to Gay, adding the E in hopes that it would catch the same way his idol, Sam Cooke's name, caught on. His biographer, David Ritz, also revealed that the underlying reason Marvin did that was to silence rumors of his sexuality and to put more distance between himself and his father. Following the rebrand, he released his first single, Let Your Conscience Be Your Guide, in May 1961. He then released the album The Soulful Moods of Marvin Gaye a month later. However, these songs refused to chart and failed commercially, so he spent the rest of 1961 performing session work as a drummer. He worked with artists like The Miracles, The Marvelettes, Stevie Wonder, and The Supremes for a small stipend of $5 a week. The rise of Marvin Gaye. However, he didn't stay in the shadows for long. The following year, his solo single Hitchhike broke into the top 40 for the first time, peaking at number 30 on the Hot 100. This feat was followed by another single, Stubborn Kind of Fellow, which was released that September. It ended up being fairly successful, charting at number 8 on the R&B chart and number 46 on the Billboard Hot 100. He also delved into the world of duets with hitmakers like Diana Ross and Mary Wells. His successful duet album with Mary Wells, titled Together, reached number 42 on the pop album chart. Following his immense success in his duet with Mary, he collaborated with another female artiste, Tammy Terrell. The 3 years that followed saw Marvin and Tammy wow the entire country as the royal couple of R&B, with duet performances of different popular songs. Unfortunately, their star status was cut short by Tammy's untimely passing in 1970. Marvin, who shared a deep friendship with Tammy, felt so broken that he reportedly went into depression and swore never to partner with another female vocalist again and threatened to abandon the stage for good. And he made good on his promise. Marvin even dived into the world of Hollywood acting in 2 movies in the 90s. However, in both roles, he was a Vietnam veteran. His first role was in the George McCowan film The Ballad of Andy Crocker, which starred Lee Majors. The film was about a war veteran returning to find that his expectations had not been met and feeling betrayed. His other performance was in the 1971 film Chrome and Hot Leather, which was about a group of Vietnam veterans taking on a bike gang. Though the film starred William Smith, Marvin managed to capture hearts through the role of Jim, which he took like he was born for. For many artists, Marvin's story so far would pass as enough of a success, but the great man was just getting started. What's going on? Fame and success. But just when he was reportedly about to delve deeper into acting, his label Motown gave him an ultimatum that ended that dream. He was asked to either make music or leave. And that was how his infamous album, What's Going On, was born in 1971. Inspired by the social unrest in the US at that time and his brother's 3-year stint fighting in Vietnam, the album's 9 tracks featured a connection without pauses, like a stream of consciousness contemplation. Motown's president initially kicked against Marvin's entire album and his desire to talk about politics, but instead of caving to their expectations, Marvin decided to challenge himself and his audience by embarking on yet another musical reinvention. Having been a victim of social injustice himself, Marvin chose to fight through his voice. His album talked about areas like social justice, environmental awareness, addiction to illicit substances, war, and faith. He wasn't the first black artist to produce challenging music after assuming complete creative control. James Brown had done it, and so had Curtis Mayfield. However, Marvin, who butted heads hard with Motown to pursue a new artistic direction, was the first to do it in such a thematically and musically cohesive way, and the whole world took notice of that. Upon the album's release, not only was the title track a hit on both the R&B and pop charts, but the album was a commercial success. It sold over 2 million copies and was on the charts for well over a year. It officially became the best-selling album of Marvin's long career. For the album, Marvin received 2 Grammy Award nominations and several NAACP Image Awards. The album also topped Rolling Stone's year-end list as its Album of the Year. Billboard magazine also named him Trendsetter of the Year following the album's success. What's Going On wasn't just any album. It was the album that opened up other black artists to new creative possibilities. The album showed them that things were possible, like the $1 million deal he signed with Motown. After that was the most lucrative deal by a black recording artist at the time. What's Going On opened up the world to Marvin's abilities, and he didn't disappoint, as his next album was also fire. His album Let's Get It On was released on August 1973, and it immediately earned the #1 spot on the Hot 100 charts. Also, despite his reservations about collaborating with a female artist again after Tammy's demise, Marvin did another duet project with Diana Ross titled Diana and Marvin. The song garnered international success despite their deeply contrasting artistic styles. Sadly, Marvin left Motown after that and signed with CBS's Columbia subsidiary. Following that, he released his first post-Motown album titled Midnight Love. The first single from the album, Sexual Healing, which was written and recorded in Ostend in Freddie Cousert's apartment, was released in October 1982 and became Gaye's biggest career success, spending a record 10 weeks at #1 on the Hot Black Singles chart, becoming the biggest R&B hit of the 80s. But just as Marvin was starting to lay down his legacy, he was passed away in the strangest circumstance. Untimely and strange demise. The immense success of his album led Marvin to embark on his final concert tour, the Sexual Healing Tour, on April 18, 1983. The tour had 51 dates in total and included a record-breaking 6 sold-out shows at Radio City Music Hall in New York City. Unfortunately, this wasn't so great for Marvin, who was already stressed by the tour and was using cocaine to cope. This led to a cocaine-triggered paranoia and illness. So when the tour ended, he immediately moved into his parents' house in Los Angeles. His mother expressed that when the tour was over, Marvin was in such bad shape that she had never seen him before. He was exhausted and needed hospital care, which his label didn't care to provide. Sadly, Marvin returned home, but his return made his life an even more unbearable situation. His substance abuse was spiraling out of control. According to his mother, Alberta, most of the time, Marvin was holed up in his room, leering at explicit videotapes and magazines and taking illicit substances, which made his paranoia worse. He even installed an elaborate, expensive security and surveillance system at their home. To worsen things, the animosity between Marvin and his father was still there. The tension was even worse because his father had done many prior things, like leaving Marvin's mother to recover alone after her kidney surgery and selling the family house in Washington. Despite this, the men tried to keep things civil and avoid one another. But it wasn't enough. Marvin's sister Jean confessed it was during that time that her father had told her that if Marvin touched him, he would be killed. Sadly, he made good on that threat. The night before Marvin's passing, on the 31st of March, 1984, his father was angry because he couldn't find a document concerning an insurance policy. He yelled at Alberta and blamed her for losing the document. He was still angry when he woke up the next morning on April 1st, the day before Marvin's 45th birthday. At about 11 a.m., He hollered up the stairs at his wife, who was in Marvin's bedroom. The son went to the top of the stairs and hollered back that he should speak to his mother's face if he had something to say. Marvin Sr. hurried up the steps and entered Marvin Jr.'s room, but his son, who wasn't having it, pushed his father out into the hallway, knocked him down, and started kicking him. Alberta interceded and the men separated. Marvin returned to his room and his father went to retrieve the pistol Marvin had given him earlier. He pulled the trigger and shot his son in the chest, tearing through his heart. Then he fired again after Marvin had already fallen to the ground. Stevie Wonder on Marvin Gaye's True Cause of Demise. Losing your life by his own father was the last thing the whole world expected to see. Marvin's passing came as a shock and had everyone pointing fingers and offering theories about the events leading up to it. His sister, Jean Gaye, stated that in the past, their father had made it very clear that if Marvin were to ever strike him, he'd murder him. Their father said so publicly on more than one occasion. So when he instigated a fight with his father, many people believed he wanted to die, but opted for his father's hand since he couldn't do it himself. His bodyguard, Andre White, confirmed this theory. He told author Turner that the case was in effect a self-inflicted demise. He said that Marvin had wanted to die, but he couldn't do it himself, so he got his father to do it. Sadly, his father was successful and Marvin was buried a month later at a funeral with 10,000 people in attendance. Artists like Smokey Robinson and Dick Gregory gave readings where Marvin was laid to rest. His very good friend and mentee from Motown Records, Stevie Wonder, was present in attendance and sang the most heartbreaking song. According to Mark Rabowski's biography on Stevie, it was a song that he had originally composed titled "Lighting Up the Candles" and was supposed to be a duet with Marvin that he never got to present to him. He had heard Marvin was working on a duets album at the time of his passing. After his passing, Stevie finished the song and sang it at his funeral on April 1984. The song's lyrics commemorated the great legacy Marvin had left behind, and Stevie was bent on showing that to people. Unlike other people who had concluded that Marvin wanted to kill himself, Stevie didn't write him off. Instead, he focused on showcasing the legend that was Marvin Gaye. He never passed up an opportunity to pay homage to Marvin for inspiring his hit tracks like "You Are the Sunshine of My Life." In fact, Stevie owed a great deal of his success to Marvin for setting him on a path to greatness, and he acknowledged it at his funeral. He told the crowd that Marvin was who Marvin truly was, and that he was the one who encouraged Stevie to feel the music he had within me and to feel it and let it flow. And he didn't just give him advice, he actively helped Stevie so that in 1971, he gained complete creative control over his music. That ushered him into his classic period that lasted over half a decade. Rolling Stone Record Guide magazine said his albums pioneered stylistic approaches that helped determine the shape of pop music for the next decade. He also followed Marvin's footsteps in activism, joining in movements like creating Martin Luther King Day and hosting rallies and protests. Sadly, when he was faced with the passing of Marvin, Stevie became a broken man. He had already endured the lives and demises of many musical icons during his tenure, so the passing of Marvin cut deep. He remarked that he felt heartbroken to lose such a legend who loved music so passionately. Stevie told NPR a year later that it was so hard for